Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first live webinar of the year. We had some great webinars last year, and we've got a star-studded lineup for you this year to start it again. So I'm really excited if you're joining us now, and if not, if you're watching on at a later date, I hope this is still relevant and the world has not changed dramatically since this call. But if it has changed dramatically, I hope it's for the positive rather than the negative. So, welcome again. This is our call from Adopt a Negotiator, the Adopt a Negotiator project, which is a project of the Global Call for Climate Action, and we engage young people all around the world to write about climate change. And I'm hoping if you're watching now that you're interested in writing about climate change, and particularly about the INDCs. And we're going to be talking all about that interesting acronym. Don't worry if you don't know what the INDCs are. We're going to go through it a little bit. But if you do know what the INDCs are, I can guarantee you that you're going to learn a lot today, and you're going to get insights from some of the best in the business, or at least in my opinion. On the line, we have Christian Territier, who is the guru of communications on the Global Call for Climate Actions team. We also have David Tong, who is somewhat of a multitasking lawyer, environmental activist slash very good photographer, also on the line, representing kind of the youth voice, also Generation Zero, and affiliated with some of the other big environmental organizations in New Zealand. So might be giving us a bit of a perspective from right down south. And someone else from Jubilee South will also be joining us. That's Denise Fontanilla, who is enjoying the busy life of strategizing on behalf of southern countries all around the world around climate justice. And I'm sure you'll all enjoy her unique perspective. And I'm personally really happy that she's on this call and can connect with us. So I hope you're all looking forward to a call which I believe will be the best thing on TV right now, but that's obviously depending on when exactly you're watching. Breaking Bad is no longer on the airways, so I don't think there's any good alternatives, but perhaps there are, and if there are, send me a tweet. So if you want to get involved in this Twitter conversation, or if you want to ask a question live on the air, which most likely I'll ignore, but potentially I will accept. If you want to ask a question, tweet it at #ClimateTracker, hashtag ClimateTracker, or use the hashtag INDCs, so INDCS. Both of those hashtags will get a fair bit of public kind of viewing, but the hashtag Climate Tracker specifically will be the one that you'll be able to ask your questions. And we've already had some questions coming in which we're going to ask, so if you have any others, please let us know. Tweet at me right now. You can tweet using the hashtag, you can tweet to my personal account, you can tweet to Adopt a Negotiator, and we'll be ready to answer any questions that you have. And I really hope we can fit in like a good lot of questions live from our audience, because I really want to make this as interactive as possible. But before I do, to Christian, who's, like I told you, a bit of a communications guru, and I want to kind of open up with the first question. So Christian, the INDCs, intended nationally determined contributions, they were developed last year as an idea of getting kind of as an idea to get a way of measuring what everyone in the world is doing, every country in the world is committing to doing in the post-2020 period. But can you explain a little bit more about them and kind of touch on why they're so important?
Mm-hmm. I can, and thank you very much for the friendly welcome, and also for the opportunity to speak to the group today on this wonderful TV show. I look forward to the next 50 minutes with you all. It's great that Chris already told us what the INDCs are, or what the name stands for. I actually refuse to learn the real spelled out full-length meaning of that abbreviation up until recently, because I thought getting too much in the weeds on this and actually understanding what INDC means might be counterproductive. But I realized that for a handy briefing, it is important to dive a bit into the weeds. However, when we talk about communicating the INDCs a bit later, I think we should try to get back out of the weeds, because if we want to engage audiences in talking about these INDCs, it will probably be helpful to stay as top line as possible and not get dragged too much into the tricky bits of the UNFCCC negotiations. But I think let's hold that thought for now and return to it later. So as Chris has said, last year governments agreed that they all should submit INDCs this year. In my words, I would call them climate action plans, national commitments. There is no official other way of talking about them. You can choose your own language depending on what is maybe already phrased in your region or country. But essentially that's what they are. They are a country's plan about what it intends to do to fight climate change. And they are not just writing this plan for themselves to have it in a fancy shelf in one of the ministry building in the capital city of the country, but they are submitting these plans to the UNFCCC, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, where all countries, I haven't counted, but I think we have 190 something countries on this planet, where all countries are expected to submit such a plan at some stage this year. Now, we know that, but we don't know much more in terms of definite information about these INDCs, because as it happens in those UN negotiations, countries sometimes like not to make very detailed, clear, and binding decisions. So last year, when these countries met in Lima at the COP in December, they were supposed to agree on all sorts of details regarding these INDCs. What has to be in them? When do they have to be submitted? How should they be structured? How do we make sure that they can be compared from one country to another? But unfortunately, the Lima decisions were somewhat weak, soft, and blurry on most of these things, and that's why it is well possible that INDCs that come in this year from the different countries might be a bit of a surprise bag, if that's a term in English, I'm not sure, and they might all be a bit different. So some covering only mitigation, which means ways to cut emissions. Others might be covering finance, so mobilizing the money that is needed to cut emissions or to take adaptation measures against the climate impacts that are hitting us already. We don't really know what to expect from these different INDCs. They might be different from country to country, but one thing is clear, they are all extremely important. And to answer Chris's question of why they are important, I would like to offer two views. One, because they are crucial building blocks for the Paris Agreement that we are expected to get at the end of the year. You probably all know that we have the Paris COP in December, and the INDCs are every country's contribution to the agreement which will be crafted and agreed in Paris. If you imagine that agreement as made up of hundreds of building blocks, then the INDCs make up for the first 190 something building blocks. But there's obviously more to a Paris agreement. It's not just INDCs from countries, from my country Germany, or from Denise's country Philippines, or from David's country New Zealand, but also about a framework that ties all these different national plans together and defines how things will be measured and verified, that determines how finance will flow and be managed to fund all these activities. But they are important because they are key building blocks for the Paris Agreement at the end of the year. And then I would like to offer a second view on why they are important before I close. I think these INDCs and the fact that all countries submit such plans show us something. They show us that we have essentially entered a new era. The optimistic me believes that this is a moment where we can tell that the fossil fuel age is essentially ending or beginning to end, and that the new renewable energy era is dawning. Because think about it, if every country on Earth now submits a plan for how to foster the ongoing transition from dirty fossil fuels to clean renewable energies and from other bad old so-called solutions to clean and more social friendly new solutions, then that is a remarkable moment and a remarkable shift. It signifies that not only a few pioneer countries are on board with this transition from dirty to clean, but all countries. They all have to submit a plan. I think that makes them significant. I know we have to be realistic. Not all of these plans will be great, and we'll talk more about that later. Some will be very weak and disappointing, but the fact that all countries will have plans about switching from dirty to clean energies is a remarkable thing that we haven't had before, and therefore I think we should look at this as a moment of opportunity and then work towards stronger plans in the countries which present weak plans. I think I leave it there for now. Chris, and hope that that was a useful first start on what the INDCs are and why they are important.
Yeah, definitely. And what a beautiful way to say it, you know, the end of the fossil fuel era and the dawn of renewable energies. But I might just pass over to someone who might be a little bit more, I guess, maybe not as optimistic as you might be, Christian. And I might pass it over to Denise now. So if you haven't met Denise, Denise works with Jubilee South now, and is one of the strongest voices on the rights of developing countries to kind of develop in a way that they can support their populations, and not in, and in a way that kind of ensures that developed countries pay their climate debt, especially in the INDCs. So Denise, we heard how optimistic Christian is about the INDCs, and I was wondering what you were feeling while he was talking about that. But I was also wondering, what are you and maybe what are some of your partners expecting from the INDCs? We heard that some INDCs include finance, some include adaptation, some include mitigation. But what are you expecting overall, and maybe kind of touch on some of those finer points if you can.
Okay. Thanks, Christian. So like Chris said, I'm actually the incoming climate justice program staff of Jubilee South in Asia, and I've already started working with some climate justice groups about how also to phrase how to work around this newish concept of INDCs. So as Christian said, we don't really know what to expect. There wasn't really uh, a clear guide from the previous decisions in the climate negotiations about how to go through it. So there are some common headers that, like Christian said, you have some countries are most countries would be focused on mitigation commitments. Some developing countries are fighting for adaptation commitments also to be in there, even though it is not that clear in the former negotiations negotiations texts that adaptation really is part of the INDC. So some are focusing, like the groups that I'm working in with. We are focused on how there should be means of implementation. That means finance, technology, and capacity building. How to ensure that developing countries, the most vulnerable countries, will not just be forced to make these bottom-up commitments, but also get some assurance from developed countries that they have that they will have the means to do these all of these climate action plans. So what we see now in the new climate regime, as Christian said, is that from what used to be uh, top-down approach, given the Kyoto Protocol, given that previous regime, you now have a bottom-up approach. You now have these international intended. Sorry, see, I don't even know what INDC means sometimes. So intended nationally determined contributions. So we ideally developed countries would have economy-wide reductions for including for major economies, emerging economies. So that means that you're looking at emissions reduction as a whole and not just looking at it from a sectoral approach, while other countries can work on sectoral targets. For example, the Philippines is looking at submitting INDCs on energy, on transport, on forestry. But of course, the most vulnerable countries are encouraged to just do their actions in their own ways. And some of them are looking at just submitting their adaptation plans. Some coalitions of vulnerable countries are still focused on what they can submit as their mitigation targets, even though they really have not much emissions to speak of, but just they're just looking at the INDCs as also a way to force developed countries which have much more not just emissions but resources to help avert the climate crisis, just to push them to commit more. And as we discussed with other climate communications groups, to help it become a race, a race to the top, this INDC's game.
So Denise, I was wondering when you were talking about this as a fight. You mentioned that you're fighting to support some countries in their efforts, and I guess probably fighting to oppose some of the INDCs that might be presented. Can you describe some of that fight and what exactly you might be fighting for?
For example, we already have the INDC submitted to the UNFCCC by the European Union and Switzerland. So we're looking at climate justice groups are saying that while this is good that finally there are submissions in the UNFCCC. At the same time, they're not ambitious enough. 2 degrees Celsius. That we need, we need even more mitigation reductions. We need even more climate finance. We need assurances that there will be support for developing countries to make their adaptation actions.
So do you think those are things that you would encourage, I guess, people talking about when they're writing about the INDCs?
Yes, I think even talking about the INDCs now, there's also this I think there's also this danger of focusing on it too much, because while INDCs are the building blocks of the Paris Agreement, as Christian already said, there is still the climate negotiations are still even bigger than the INDCs. That we mustn't forget that the INDCs are, for example, for only for 2020 and beyond, and we also have to look at what these countries, especially the developed ones, will be doing in the years between now and 2020, for example. Looking at what they can do now, even outside of the climate negotiations. So,
okay.
Yeah, I hope that answers that.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you. I might we've had a bit of a question online, and it kind of links in with something I wanted to talk about. So I might pass it over to David. Now, David is one of the most energetic campaigners you'll ever meet. He works on a whole host of different organizations, and hopefully will bring in a kind of a whole range of understanding to this question. But David, we've had a question asking what's the feasibility of some of these mitigation plans, and I know that Denise talked about means of implementation, and we've already seen from the EU and Switzerland that these INDC documents aren't so detailed. They don't go into like really kind of big depth about exactly how they're going to achieve these commitments and exactly what processes and what industries are going to go through cuts and things like that. So I was wondering if you could talk about what you see as kind of like the opportunities we have to try and influence these INDCs to be as effective as possible, and if you think we have any chance of trying to influence it in a way that can maybe reach those kind of better understandings of exactly how countries are going to achieve what they're saying they're going to achieve.
Thanks, Chris. I think there are 2 stages to this question and to this campaigning. The first is persuading countries to put the good things into their INDCs. And the second stage will begin immediately after the INDC comes in, which is driving our governments, our economies, and our countries to actually either follow through with the plans or step it up again. I have a lot of confidence that civil society can influence what is in our country's commitment. because I know we've done it. I've spoken at length with. Well, I'm not sure what's happening with the echo there. Hopefully, it doesn't repeat. But spoken at length with with Gareth Hughes from the New Zealand who was heavily involved campaigning around Copenhagen the last time. And the word is that before New Zealand went into Copenhagen, our government's target was a 5% rise by 2020 from 1990 levels. What they did, and what they committed to in Copenhagen, was a 10 to 20% cut. And the only reason we can assume that the government stepped its ambition up was an unprecedented public campaign and the sign-on campaign. So when civil society speaks with one powerful voice, governments sometimes have no choice but to listen. And in 2015, there are a lot of stars aligning when it comes to civil society activism. We've got two big international processes at play. We've also got a divestment movement gaining new strength. We've got 350 campaigning against fossil fuel investment worldwide. Even the Guardian newspaper taking mass media climate communications to a new level. So we are in a position where we have a big groundswell of public action to call for governments to bring ambitious INDCs. And we aren't going to move them to perfection, but we can move them. Which means we then have the second difficulty of putting content into what is promised. The INDCs are supposed to contain a top-level target, have been invited to, and really morally should contain, some climate finance, adaptation, and implementation support for developing states, especially developed states should be committing to put their money where their mouth is and support other countries and pay a bit of that climate debt. But the next stage, after, be it May, June, August, I'm even hearing October for some countries, after that, after the INDCs are in, the fight beyond Paris begins. It's not just about what we get into the Paris Treaty, but it's about driving our governments to meet their commitments. And so Generation Zero here are looking and have been pushing for the last year, Gen Zero and New Zealand's youth climate movement, looking at pushing for a comprehensive plan, including the formation of a climate commission, re-strengthening our emissions trading scheme or moving from emissions trading scheme to a climate to carbon tax, putting a bunch of actual policy mechanisms in place to achieve the target. Because our record of achieving our targets is bad. Remember I said we promised 5 years ago to cut by 10 to 20%. Rumour is, or no, not rumour, off the record from sources, that 10 to 20% is off the table. Is what we're looking at now. And that's not good enough. It's up to us as people to push for more. In fact, even worse, our net emissions have actually increased by 37%, and we're relying on emissions trading to pull it down. So it's always going to be up to civil society to hold our governments to account and to persuade our governments to do what they promised to do. Over to you, Chris.
I definitely agree, David, and I definitely kind of feel your passion, and I hope everyone watching can understand that David's passion comes not only as something he just says, but he lives it as well. When I asked him to join this call, he was editing photos from a protest he was at today. I think he left the protest to go to a legal meeting about how to save refugees around the world or something like that. But David really runs around, and I definitely encourage you to try and contact him if you have any more questions about a whole range of things he gets up to in New Zealand. But if you're feeling kind of down about some of the things that he said, I want you to know that that New Zealand civil society, as he mentioned, is really pushing hard, and if anyone wants to try and support them or wants to find out more, they should reach out to David. He's very active on Twitter, and I'm sure if you reached out to him, he'd give you a a lot of good further information on that struggle that's going on there. But I might bring it back up to Christian now, because Denise and David have put us very pessimistically down, and we need a lift, and I'm feeling that Christian's going to give me a lift. I can see the raised eyebrows. He's a fellow curly haired man. Curly haired boys, we don't get sad for very too long. So I'm looking forward to Christian jumping back on, and I'm wondering, Christian, if we can think more a bit about how we're communicating the INDC specifically, and you're a part of a small, I understand, a baked goods conspiracy group that works on communicating the INDCs, and I'm wondering if you could describe some of the strategizing that's happened, and kind of talk about how people who might want to write about the INDCs, how might they go about it, and what type of strategy might they bring into it.
Actually, I think Chris. First of all, you have to mute so that the echo goes. Thank you. Second of all, I think there's probably not even so much of a difference between optimism and pessimism on this call. I think there's one thing we all agree on, and that's a story which I think is more and more true in more and more parts of this world. And it's the story about the ongoing transition from dirty fossil fuels to renewable energies, with all the social benefits, health benefits, job benefits, economic benefits that delivers. I think Denise and David, just as much as every other activist working on climate change on this planet, are on board with that ongoing transition. And the negative or positive or optimism or pessimism happens against the backdrop of that story. So when I talk about how to communicate INDCs, I think I want to start with that ongoing narrative of the ongoing transition. Our story is essentially a story of strength. We used to have a story of weakness, I'm afraid. We had a story where we were afraid of a doom and gloom scenario with climate change spinning out of control, and where we were essentially begging governments to save us. I think that's how we approached Copenhagen, the big climate conference in 2009. And unfortunately, we didn't get everything we wanted in Copenhagen. And I think this time we are in a different space. We are stronger. We are more united. So many people from so many different sectors across our societies are part of this movement now, which used to be an environmentalist movement and is now so much broader. And I think all these people don't just want the transition from dirty fossil fuels to clean renewable energies. They are driving it. It's happening already. I think that's the important thing to tell everybody who doesn't know yet. There is an ongoing transition. It's picking up speed because all those who are driving it, the activists, the people, the local communities, some progressive businesses, investors, even a few governments actually, I think they all see the benefits of that ongoing transition. So we are arguing from a story of strength. We are making a change already today. The problem is it's not adding up yet. It's not happening at the scale and at the speed where we need it to happen to have a stable climate for the decades to come, for the future generations, etc. So who can make it scale up and speed up to the levels where we need it? I think that's where the governments come in, and that's where maybe the negative and pessimism comes in, because unfortunately many governments are not really there yet and are still very much under the control or the sway of a corporate lobby that is determined to dig up more coal, burn more oil, put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, create more climate change. But I think the ongoing transition is our success story for us as a movement across all these countries, north and south, across all these sectors. Now, the INDCs, how do they fit in against this backdrop of the ongoing transition? As I said earlier, I think they signify that this transition is ongoing and happening. The fact that every country is putting in place such a plan now, which somehow explains how it will deal with climate change and the energy transformation, is evidence that the transition is happening and is now reaching all countries. I think we have to say that. But obviously we can't stop there. We can't just tell a happy story of an ongoing transition which somehow magically will take us to the end of the fairy tale where we are all dancing around the tree happily ever after. It won't happen if we don't fight harder, if we don't do what David and what Denise have been talking about so passionately. So in talking about the INDCs, I think we should see, when we look at them individually, how strong or weak they are and what they cover. So I want to pick up on what Denise and David have been saying earlier. The European Union INDC has been used as an example, and Denise is right. It pretty much only talks about mitigation, so cutting emissions. Why does it not talk about adapting to the impacts of climate change that are happening already? Why does it not talk about the need for finance to collaborate with poorer or more vulnerable countries and help them also build the clean power systems they need and the adaptive measures they need to protect their people? Why do we not talk about loss and damage mechanisms, which are a tool to deal with impacts that can no longer be avoided? Even if we are great at adaptation, there might be impacts that can no longer be avoided, and they will cause damage, and that will mean costs, that will mean the need for support, for cash, for all sorts of things, for communities to come back on their feet where the disaster hit. So all these things are not currently included in the first few INDCs that we've seen from the European Union, from the Swiss, and they need to be included in those INDCs that are still to come. So next up, at the end of the month, for example, we have the United States of America. I think we are expecting some Latin American INDCs, maybe from Mexico, maybe from Chile. There might be a few others. Those INDCs should be broader. They should include these elements, and I think we should be talking about that. An interesting thing is how we talk about the shortcomings. You know, if the EU or the US or anybody, New Zealand or the Philippines, produce an INDC that's not very strong, that's somehow disappointing. If any of these countries produce disappointing INDCs, what do we do? I think if we are dealing with an angry activist audience that's already on side, then it might be fair enough to appeal to anger and to say, look, it's great that they're doing a plan, it's great that we have the ongoing transition, but this is clearly not enough to drive the ongoing transition to scalable levels, right? They need to do better than this. Now, if you have audiences that are not angry activists who are already on side with this, but maybe think more of your sort of aunts and uncles, moderate people somewhere in the middle of society, perhaps they don't respond well to anger. Maybe they need something that is more tangible, something that talks about what an INDC really is or does for them, for their lives, or maybe for the economies of their countries. And that's where you can look at things like health benefits, jobs, or savings from imported fuels. I'm currently working on an assessment together with colleagues in other organizations where we look at the difference between the INDCs that countries put forward and how much more benefits they would have tapped if they would have put stronger INDCs forward, which are more in line with a safe climate future and with 100% renewable energy by 2050. And it's very, very striking. We have some preliminary numbers, and you can see how tens, hundreds, or even millions of lives will be saved from more ambitious INDCs. You can see how billions in dollars will be saved from avoided fossil fuel imports if countries make the transition faster and go into renewables faster. We have statistics there which tell us that tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands or even millions of jobs, depending on the country, can be created if we make stronger INDCs and make the transition faster in line with trajectories towards a stable climate and 100% renewables by 2050. So, you know, sometimes it's about calling out a government that's disappointing us and failing, and I think that can appeal to an activist audience which is already on side and understands the deep injustices and dynamics in these negotiations. Sometimes when we are dealing with other audiences who are elsewhere in society, maybe we need to make it more tangible for them. And the stuff I've told you about jobs, health benefits, and savings can be a way to tell them, look, your government has presented a weak plan. If they had presented a stronger plan, then that would have been so good for economy on all these fronts. Here are the figures. Don't you want these jobs? Don't you want these savings? Don't you want these lives saved? Then tell your government to make a stronger plan. So I think those are all ways of talking about this. Obviously, there are materials to follow up on the talking points I'm giving you here. So I think once they are available in the coming weeks, Chris, we can feed them to your audience for today's call so that people can consider them in their writing. I'll leave it there, I think. But there were interesting responses earlier on how to potentially make INDCs stronger, which go beyond rhetoric. And I hope we can come back to that in questions later, because I think there are a few other ideas that I could add beyond what Denise and David have offered.
Definitely, and that's definitely a goal of this call, to try and focus on how we can respond and make these INDCs stronger before they're getting written, or stronger even after they're presented. Just today I was reading some blogs from coming out of India that looked like they were kind of not really going to push for too much in their INDC, and I think it's going to be a real push for some of our writers in India in particular to try and think about how they can push for their INDC to be stronger. And just, I guess, on that point, Denise, I was wondering if you could kind of comment on something that was asked on Twitter, but also something that Christian was touching on. If the EU INDC isn't obviously as wide-reaching and as all-encompassing as we like, if the Swiss INDC isn't as strong a mitigation target as we might like, or only talks briefly about equity and doesn't seem to mention some of the other topics we would be interested in, or you might be interested in seeing in an INDC, how can we expect that from other countries? And should we be expecting that? And can we make direct asks to ask for those things in those INDCs?
Cool. well, actually, even after EU and Switzerland have already submitted their INDCs, and now and other countries which have yet to submit their INDCs, like Christian said, we activists, bloggers, other members of civil society can also offer clear alternatives. Look at how, for example, some groups have about what countries how countries should reduce their emissions by this percent, how they can commit their proper climate fair shares, for example. So you have groups, not just Jubilee South and other climate justice groups, but even the World Resources Institute has some plans on what the 2015 agreement should look like. So maybe our trackers could look at materials like those, see more, as you said, more tangible, or more concrete numbers on the table, and try to write from that perspective. And what else? Even after they've submitted these bad INDCs, as David said, it's not really the end all and be all of the agreement. That now that we have space to further thresh out these INDCs and and propose alternatives and do our lobbying, even just not just through media, but those of you who are who are also really working inside, lobbying inside, that you can actually pressure them, even within Congress or within your executive branches of government to actually do more, even in spite of these INDCs. So yeah, I think it's a tall order, but it's not really impossible given how much pressure we're seeing on all these governments to actually commit something and make Paris really much more meaningful than what we saw in 2009 in Copenhagen.
For sure, and I think you really touched on a really important point there, that these INDCs are kind of one critical moment, but they are definitely not the only critical moment. And for me personally, I see them as a great opportunity for both pushing for a transparency and ambition. It's our chance to try and push our countries to very openly make a public statement saying this is what our country is willing to do, but also be transparent about some of their aspirations and use that as a stepping stone. So as soon as the INDC is released, we now know what their kind of current level is, and it's then our job to try and like know what our platform is and what we have to jump from and what we have to get them to jump up to. So so I definitely think it's a great point, but it's definitely still a challenge, of course. You know, the U.S. has kind of very blankly stated that it's already announced what its levels are going to be last year with its agreement with China. Some other countries are obviously kind of making some statements that aren't as positive as we might like, and it's going to be a challenge for us in the short term. But I think both this is an opportunity to push our countries to be more transparent and obviously ambitious. But as soon as it's out there, that's your chance to pounce. That's your chance to like really kind of move around exactly what target is out there and exactly what they've left out. So, you know, all of the things we mentioned before, like loss and damage, like finance, like adaptation, perhaps the mitigation target isn't as strong, perhaps their pre-2020 goals aren't as strong. As soon as that's out there, we have a building block to work from. And so I think for those in the EU who might be watching, for those in Switzerland, for those who might be watching from the US and Mexico and Chile, who might be expecting INDCs very soon, you know, this is a great opportunity to kind of, you know, get your spirits high and get ready to really jump on what might come out if you're not expecting too much. But we have another question, and I might throw it back to Christian. And this question's a little bit more of a complicated one, and I might just read out the question and see what you can make of it, Christian. So the question says, what are the strategies which can be employed to make sure that the readers realize, so obviously these are readers who are reading an article that you might write, the readers realize and perceive that they have an actual chance at influencing the INDCs, especially in developing countries, where there is a vast chasm between access to government, and I guess with government officials. So I guess kind of stepping away from a writer's perspective and how you might write about the INDCs and how you might frame it, and stepping into a reader's perspective, or I guess how you can write for a reader, how do you think we can make readers feel like, you know, this is their opportunity to kind of push their governments for a stronger INDC, or to respond to the INDC in a way to try and push their governments further?
I think there are a number of possible answers to this question. It depends a little bit. And sorry, Chris, you have to mute again. Thank you. There are a number of ways for people to engage, I think, in the INDCs, depending on how a government does it. So, for example, at the moment, Latin American governments, like in Chile and Mexico, are running public consultations on their INDCs. This is something you don't necessarily read about in the morning newspaper, so you need to be a bit switched on and follow this process. Maybe that's something that bloggers can write about and make more popular towards their audiences. But there you have governments who actually at least signal that they are interested in hearing from their people, from their citizens, what they think about the INDC. It's not the most obvious thing for people to do, right? You are used to going to the ballot box and voting for a new president every 4 or 5 years or something. You're not necessarily used to going to a website and write detailed comments on a policy document that your government is putting up for consultation. But why not? Why not? If people are actually really interested in shaping the future of their country and the energy transition that's underway, then engage in that process. And if you are not sure that you can, or if your readers are not sure that they can because they feel they lack knowledge, they have a knowledge barrier to commenting and engaging, then maybe there are vehicles that take you into this debate. So campaigning organizations or think tanks who are engaging from a more professional standpoint and who are looking for people who support their views. So both David and Denise have told us about how they are running grassroots campaigns in their countries. I think if you don't feel you want to go to a ministry website and put track changes into an INDC or something like that, you might want to engage with a campaign organization which has experts who feel comfortable doing this. So I think there's the direct way for people who are really switched on and care for the detail, and there's the indirect way for people who might feel they have a bit of a threshold but can engage with groups that can do it for them or in their name or on their behalf. And obviously there are a million different levels there to engage. Sometimes it's clicktivism and you sign your name up on a list or for a petition, and sometimes it's really participating in discussions, going to handover events with a minister, etc. So I think that's one way of engaging in INDCs where countries open up these channels. I don't think that all countries will run public consultations. As far as I know, the European Union did not have a public consultation, even though it should have had. But in those countries where you have it, I'd say that's a way to engage. Then obviously, I come back to a point I tried to make earlier. If we want to tell public audiences about these plans, we should probably not call them INDC. We should probably not mention much that it's happening in the UNFCCC, and we should probably not talk about many other things that have weird abbreviations and acronyms, but we should talk about it in things that are more real to these people. I think if I tell my aunt or uncle that they need to go to a minister website and edit an INDC, which is going to be the submission to the UNFCCC, my aunt or uncle will shake their heads and say, I don't know anything about that, that's not for me, so, sorry Christian, tell somebody else to help you out. But if I tell my aunt or uncle that our government is making a plan for how to transition the economy of our nation, and that it's about their jobs, their tax money, their health, or the health and jobs of their children and grandchildren, they might actually care. They might actually sit up and listen and go, oh Christian, that's relevant, that's important, isn't it? And that's also a way you can talk about this on websites, in blogs, or in the news media. So I think take it out of the really technical sort of negotiations bubble as much as you can and talk about it as important national plans that have real impacts on the real economy and the real lives of people. And that way you build a bridge where people find it more easy or more likely to connect, I imagine. Once you have established that connection or opened that door, I think, again, you might take people on a journey where they support a petition, join a campaign, or engage in some kind of lobbying activity. And I would like to end on a third thought which is related to this. Obviously, those INDCs are contributions to the Paris Agreement, which is for the time post-2020, right? So in a way, it's not about now, you think. It's about the next decade. But then, how about a government, let's say the New Zealand government puts out an INDC and talks a great game about all the wonderful things they will do after 2020 in the coming decade. But at the same time, they might just be about to decide a new coal power plant somewhere in some province today, this year, to be built now, right? I think that's also a way to engage for activists, for organizations, but also for citizens who are concerned about projects in their neighborhood. If David's neighbor is concerned about a coal plant going up next to their hometown, then I think he should write letters to his member of parliament, to his minister, or to his head of state, and he should call on all the other neighbors to do the same thing and to say, hey man, you are trying to put up a bloody coal power plant in my backyard, and at the same time you're putting forward INDCs or something like that for the time post-2020, and there is a massive, big freaking contradiction between the coal power plant you are trying to build now and the plan which is supposedly saving the lives of our children from 2020 onwards. Stop building the plant now if you are serious about your language for post-2020. So connecting the INDC and these big plans with stuff that's going on today in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our economies. I think that's another important way of breaking this down to the real level for real people and allowing them to engage. Because you can engage in the fight against the local coal power plant, but it's sometimes very hard to engage in the drafting of a piece of policy. For most people, that's too far up the ivory tower, but a coal power plant in their hometown, that's something they know about. And that's something they can go to and protest against and take the neighbors. I hope those are 3 useful ways of engaging with INDCs.
Ah, man, that was beautiful, Christian. I think I'm now going to write a personal letter to Google thanking them for this recording technology, because I'm just going to play that back to myself every night before I go to sleep for the rest of this week. That was just it was just lovely, and I hope everyone else kind of enjoyed that. The way Christian just kind of like, you know, dived into this. Don't talk about INDCs, talk about jobs, talk about renewable energy, talk about coal plants, you know, talk about everything that's going on and use the INDCs as a window. And that's how I always have looked at it ever since they were talked about. This is just what countries are planning to do in the, you know, period after 2020, perhaps to 2030. And for a lot of countries, that means that if they have a coal plant that's getting built right now, that's part of their plans after 2020. If they have plans to invest in renewable energies and create 3,000 new jobs in one city, that's part of their plans for post-2020. And effectively, this is just kind of a development trajectory plan. So if you have kind of any concerns about jobs or about conservation areas or about coal plants or about whatever your particular issue is or whatever you find particularly disturbing, that's the issue you need to kind of bring into this INDC discussion. The INDCs are hot right now. They are a media topic, well, at least in some circles, but in all the circles I roll in, they are a hot media topic, and this is an opportunity for you to use that window as your chance to kind of talk about these other issues. Use a coal plant that's being developed as your way to talk about the INDC and the coal plant at the same time. Talk about it like by the way of saying, we have this international obligation to tell the world that we're taking action on climate change, yet we're building this thing right here, yet we're destroying this community's livelihoods, yet we're polluting the air in Delhi or wherever it might be. Use this as your window to get media traction, and that's why the Adopt a Negotiator project is focusing on the INDCs, particularly this month. We not only see it as a key moment where you can put pressure on the INDCs themselves, but also as in a moment where you can use the INDCs to talk about some of your wider concerns. And I know that all around the world, people are concerned about things that are happening just on a daily basis, whether it's in Australia right now for myself, whether it's in the Philippines, where I know Denise can tell you privately just how many coal plants they're planning to develop regardless of their international climate rhetoric, whether it's in New Zealand, whether it's across Africa, or whether it's across Latin America. Everyone here is fighting for different things, and they're kind of the things that we want you to include when you talk about the INDCs. So I might just kind of very quickly open this question up to David and Denise. David, if you want to start, and if you can kind of, if you feel like you want to add anything very quickly to this question, because I really think it's really critical to this call.
The big thing, I reckon, is to echo what Christian said, that campaigning around the INDCs, first and foremost, is campaigning in your home country. It is about your plan, your country's plan for the next decade. That's what's going to connect to people. Those are the stories to tell. And if you can tell stories of victories in the past, where people have defined a progressive vision for how they can rebuild their economy and they can rebuild their society, those victories will be ways you can tie people to the story of what happens next. So to tell those local stories and make the INDC a key opportunity to redefine your country's economy to be all those things Christian said, renewable and sustainable and just.
Definitely. And Denise, what would you like to say if there's anything else you'd like to add?
Just listening to Christian and David about how it makes me think about how we look now at the climate regime. That we can't really look at it from a top-down perspective. Even the INDCs, that you can't really look at. You can't really frame it from that perspective of the climate negotiations. Just echoing what these two guys already said, that you can talk about it not just in terms of coal plants or mitigation. You can talk about it from a health perspective, like what China apparently is doing. You can look up at the perspective of um, you can put it in chunks. You can discuss it from very local, from very sectoral perspectives, and then work your way upwards to how that actually relates to something that will relate to people, will really connect with them, instead of being being caught in the climate negotiations and their jargon. So,
All right, great. So I think we've got some really great ideas on how we can communicate that. And David talked about local stories. Denise talked about making it as kind of personal to people as possible. And I think they're all great advice. And I'm just going to go for the last question of the call right now. And it's a bit of an interesting one. So I'd like to start with Christian if he can wrap his brains around it. It says, hi, obviously hi to the call. I have the opportunity to write an INDC, and I would like to know if you think it's something, if there's something key that should be included, and that will serve as inspirational momentum for other parties. And I might not kind of. So how do you think this particular INDC could use our contribution to foster ambition? And I will say that this is a real question. I did not make it up, and this actually comes from one of our watchers right now. So for anyone else who's watching on, let it be known that people who are actually writing INDCs are watching this. They are going to be reading your articles, and they are kind of keenly trying to find out exactly how they can also contribute to the greater global effort. So Christian, if you want to take that question head on, that would be great. And if you have any kind of other things you might like to include to wrap up the call, that would be we'd all love to hear them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. That's really very exciting to have INDC authors on this call. Maybe we should repeat the call with all the INDC authors from around the world, whoever is sitting in the ministries drafting them. They really need to hear this, right? A couple of things, I guess, on this. But before I start, just to say, it's not such a surprise, Chris, that you have such influential people on Adopt a Negotiator calls. I've always been saying that one day when I retire, which is probably in about 30 years, I will Google all the names of the people who ever, joined Adopt a Negotiator, or if it's not Google, then it's something else. I will check those names anyway, and I think I will find that they have all become impressive people who are either community leaders or government leaders, ministers, or running clean businesses that do things differently, because it's always very exciting to work with the Adopt a Negotiator crowd, young, inspiring people who will go a long way to make a different planet. So I'm not surprised that one of the alumni is now writing INDCs, and congrats on the privilege to write an INDC. Now, very hard to answer your question because I don't know which country you're writing it for. But in any case, I would say write as much ambition into it as possible, obviously, and try to get out of any fossils and into renewables as soon as possible. And that should not just be about the energy sector and electricity generation, but also about how we power transport, our homes and houses, and all the other buildings and infrastructure, etc. I think the more countries put forward more complete and balanced INDCs that do not just look at emission reductions, but also at adaptation at home, and then collaboration with other nations to adapt and mitigate together, will be inspiring and helpful. So if you can write your INDC in that way, you might get a few other countries to consider writing theirs the same way. And then we have countries thinking less in national bubbles and more in terms of collaboration, because we all know that not every country is great at doing everything. I come from an engineering country, so Germany should collaborate with other countries with less of an engineering culture to implement great technical solutions. Other countries have a strong financial history and might be able to collaborate with other nations on finance. So I think the collaboration piece is important. Flagging that you want to work with other nations on implementing your solutions is important, and being more complete than mitigation by including adaptation and capacity building and technical collaboration is all important. I think there's an interesting dynamic that might be worth mentioning. If the INDC you are writing is a developing country INDC, there are a whole range of developing countries which are apparently planning to propose so-called bifurcated INDCs. What is a bifurcated INDC? I also had to look up that word. It's essentially two different INDCs. One says what you can do on your own, so we will do this regardless, no matter what. And then another INDC will be presented which says with additional support, financial support, technological support from other countries, we can do more. So I think India, for example, is planning to produce such an INDC. where they say this is as much as we will do on our own without any help and support from outside, and then with more support we can do more. So depending on where you are writing or for which government you're writing, maybe consider doing such an alert, because this could be the inspiring thing that makes the big developed countries to really understand the importance of climate finance, which they're currently a bit ignoring, unfortunately. So if all these developing countries say we could do so much more, save more lives, save more environment, create more jobs, create more health co-benefits, if we get support for stronger INDCs, then maybe finally it dawns on the developed countries to say, right, that's about investments, right? We should cough up more climate finance so that these guys with their bifurcated INDCs can go to the more ambitious end of the spectrum. So maybe this bifurcated INDC thing is interesting if you're writing for a developing country. Final point, I think there's a question of what sort of spirit you are trying to convey. And I think it's a very fine line, and I don't know if maybe now I'm trying to get a bit into a direction where Denise would try to pull me in a slightly different direction. Obviously, it's important that we maintain justice and that different countries act up to their responsibilities and offer what they can do. But I think in the past, we've had a spirit in the international climate negotiations which was a bit too much focused on, I can't do anything until you do something or help me with everything you want me to do. So I think if we have a spirit where all nations understand that we need to do things, that we can do things, and that it is to our benefit, then I think we get a different spirit into these negotiations. But I'm not saying that developing countries should be expected to do everything without support. You've just heard me talking about support for 2 or 3 minutes. So I totally see that, and I think we need to encourage the developed countries to support the developing countries. But I think we need to break this pattern of he said, she said, and I won't move if you don't move. And I think there's now a group of developing countries which seem to have a different spirit. They say we understand why it's good for us to do things, but we could do even more things and we could be even faster if we had help and support. So give us help and support and let's work together. I think that's the spirit that might be more helpful in moving the ongoing transition forward a bit faster. So if you want to convey a spirit in your INDC that you're writing, I think that's the more helpful spirit. But I'm not saying that as a way to sort of get rid of what in the negotiations is called CBRD and what normal people would call justice. We definitely need justice, but we also need a can-do spirit.
Wow, that was definitely insightful, but potentially confronting. So Christian, I kind of commend you on your bravery in jumping out there and you know, knowing that such government figures are watching this call. You know, I hope that doesn't ostracize you from any of your kind of high-level circles there. But thank you so much for that input, and it was great. And it's my understanding that Christian might have to leave us just now for one of 8 or 9 other meetings he has today. So I'd like to put out a big thank you for Christian and a big thank you for everything that you've contributed. And it's good timing because now it means that Denise can just kind of diss you big time, and you don't have to be there to feel that pain. So thank you, Christian, and thanks for everything. And obviously, Denise, I would love to pass it over to you for your right of reply now, if you're still with us.
Yeah, but Christian, too bad I didn't, you know, get it all. I was disconnected there for a while. But you know, personally, I approach it from something like we have to understand that, you know, there's really all these countries aren't on equal footing. That you know, as to use the jargon of the climate negotiations, that there are different circumstances that for all these countries going into submitting these INDCs for the negotiations. And um, speaking as someone who is still committed to working with my own government officials in the Philippines to craft our country's INDCs, we're looking at it in such a way as what Christian said, that you know, we want to say that we are doing everything we can, not just in terms of adaptation but even mitigation. As Chris said, they, we have all these despite the fact that we are crafting our energy INDC, we still have around 24 coal plants in the pipeline, which we feel that will just lock us in and defeat the purpose of an energy emissions reduction targets. And the thing is, just to what we really need to do is for uh, us developing countries to be able to say that we're doing all we can, but we just can't do. We still have. We need more support if we want to do even more. If we if we are to carry on the responsibility of which is unfortunately our current capacities. Not really the fight that you're looking for, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. But I know kind of the passion rolls on, and definitely I think Christian was probably was in your corner as well. And for anyone's listening who might be shocked at what Denise said in terms of the 24 power plants that are being planned, I encourage you to look in and look back at your own country, because if I look back at Australia's plans for the future in terms of mining expansion and coal-fired power plant expansion as well, it gives me nightmares. So before kind of jumping at that figure, look back at what your own country is planning and potentially really use that as a chance to get reinvigorated about responding to the dire need that we have, but also using the INDCs as that opportunity. So fair is fair. I might pass this finally on to David for the final word of the call, and then I'll just wrap up. And for everyone who's still with us, thank you so much. We hope it's been engaging. And if I haven't been able to answer any of your questions, feel free to tweet at me, and we'll try and answer those questions. But I'll pass it on to David now.
I just want to make 2 points. The first one is that, especially for developed states, putting adaptation support and finance in there, even where it is a sub-regional block. If a sub-state region is fronting up with more climate finance than some states are, that's going to be a powerful tool to use in persuading states to come follow the lead from regions and front up with the cash. The second thing that we're seeing a big move to in the climate activist community, and I guess I'm particularly in this headspace after having a Greenpeace meeting on Friday and then doing stuff with 350 today, is a move towards focusing our campaigning against the supply side, and in particular on the economic risks associated with fossil fuel investments. So tell it like it is. In a regional INDC, you might not have the caution that a state government would fully impose. You might be able to get away with making the simple, true call that right now, in 2015, investing in fossil fuels is bad business. It's risky because we already have owned in oil companies' existing reserves 5 times enough petrol to have burned take us over that 2-degree target. Investing in more oil exploration through supply side or demand side fossil fuel subsidies, or simply by investing regional or national funds or private funds in petrochemicals, is just bad business. The moment governments take that 2-degree target seriously, any investment in fossil fuels is going to be a very, very bad investment. So it's time to start divesting, decarbonising, and defining our own futures from the region, the city level on up. So if you can get that kind of supply side advocacy or commitment planning into an INDC, that could be incredible, very, very useful. Over to you, Chris.
For sure, and just on that line of thought, look out for the Adopt a Negotiator Twitter feed, and we're going to be featuring a lot of stories on why coal is a bad investment, and I picked up on some great stories out of IPS on why investing in coal in India is a bad investment. And one figure I can remember off the top of my head is that if India continues on the trajectory that it is currently planning, I think up to 230,000 extra people will die each year within 15 years from air pollution alone. So that's not even including the effects of climate change, the need to adapt. That's simply the primary effects of air pollution, the soot that gets put out by and kind of the nitrous and everything that gets put out by the coal plants. You know, it's going to kill hundreds and thousands of people across India every single year. I think Delhi is already now the most polluted city in the world. So again, this is simply a question of a horrible investment, and an investment over a long period of time, and particularly the period of time which the INDCs are on. And that's why we're focusing on the INDCs. And if you're kind of connecting for the first time, at Adopt a Negotiator, we're going to be focusing on the INDCs for the next month. And we have a great kind of opportunity to write, to learn, more than just this call, but to learn more and more about the INDCs as they come in, and to kind of look at them as part of a global writing movement that we're launching this month. So we really hope that you can be involved. For everyone who wants to learn a bit more about the INDCs, or might not be currently receiving emails from us, just tweet at Adopt a Negotiator or at adoptnegotiator.org. At adoptnegotiator, not .org, or find us on the website, or kind of contact me through this Google Hangout, and I'll definitely give you all the information you need. But for those who already know about everything that's going on, thank you so much for being online. Please feel free to follow up with me personally, to my email account, to my Twitter account, or to the Adopt a Negotiator Twitter account if you have any further questions about this. We'll be sending you a bit of a briefing tomorrow, kind of covering some of the topics we talked about, and letting you know how you might want to turn this call into your first article. So thank you very much for being online. It's been a wonderful night. I've really enjoyed catching up with Denise, with David, and with Christian, though no one tell Christian that, please. And thank you everyone for being online. And if you're watching this at a later date, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you're kind of very kind of inspired as I am to kind of keep fighting, as David has been, as Denise has been, and as I will continue to do, no matter how late this night gets. So thank you everyone, and good night from me. See you all soon.